Hey, nice to see you. Thanks for the invitation to be part of this conversation today. I'm Ruth Wageman. Spent much of my life as an academic at various places studying teams, really looking at the influences that collectively help a team chart its own course to greatness. Probably the last 15, 20 years or so, that's been really focused on leadership teams and understanding how leaders and teams themselves can create the conditions for really healthy collaboration and turn out to be a really brilliant team rather than one that crashes and burns. So spent my life both studying that question and then a great deal of time working with teams and helping them realize those aspirations.
How did you end up going, teams, that's my thing. It's my life's work?
I used to get that question and my common answer was, I spend so much time studying them because I really hate working in them. But that's really half true. Like most people, I've had this experience where I've been part of an extraordinarily talented group of people that accomplished something no one of us could have accomplished alone. And I might have come in energized, but I came out even more energized by the capacities and the generosity and the creativity of the group I work with. That's the one side of it. And then the other side is, the team where you burn a tremendous amount of time and emotional energy and come out the other side of it saying any one of us could have produced something better than what we collectively produced, right? And feel like you have been, sort of alienated, undermined, and just couldn't be your best self in that context. So it's just curiosity about why you could take a really talented group of people and get either one of those outcomes. And of course, practically, what can you do about it, right? Be nice in our work supporting teams if the work we were doing was taking a solid team to greatness rather than repairing dysfunction and, healing damage and the like.
I mean, you said taking a talented team, but sometimes you can take a very talented group of individuals and they perform much lower than you'd expect. Then you can take not always, but sometimes you get that sort of, Disney moment where you take a team that's not rock stars and the output is so much better than the sum of its parts.
Yes. Both of those things are true. Yeah.
I've worked on some fantastic teams and, sports teams and business teams. In fact, I've got people I've worked with in the past and they say their life is now ruined forever because they know what good looks like. And then every time they go somewhere else, it's just a disappointment, another disappointment. I sometimes work with clients and I ask them, what's the best team you've been on? And occasionally people say, I don't think I've ever been on a good team.
That's really too bad. I have this secret fantasy, which is, I think this sort of recipe or the 6 conditions framework that we've found in our research is actually a pretty straightforward set of ideas for how you create a great team. And my secret aspiration is to get that knowledge in the hands of every 10-year-old because you see it, right? Kids are naturally collaborating organisms. Their instinct when they have an exciting idea is to pull a group together and play it out together. And imagine if long before they set foot in a workplace, they knew how to form a talented team of people and articulate a really compelling purpose and create the conditions for people to collaborate effectively, because then we wouldn't hear those sad stories of people who have never been part of a great team or have been a part of a great team at times and are mystified about how they could actually replicate that experience. That sort of helplessness, it's not necessary. I mean, I think these are ideas that people actually really could bring with them into every team they join or every team they form.
You haven't made this up, right? So some of the stuff that, some of the models that one sees, that I see, I'll ask people, what's the scientific basis of this? And they sort of made it up and they say, well, it sort of works. And anecdotally, it seems to be true. And, that can be helpful. Those models can be helpful, but yours is research based. So, how long, how did you end up here? How long has it taken? And is it all your work? Are you on the shoulders of giants?
Yeah, shoulders of giants for sure. Probably the predominant one being Richard Hackman. Richard Hackman was he was my graduate advisor at Harvard and then a longstanding colleague afterwards. And I think what's unique about our take on teams and understanding their the drivers of their effectiveness is, you were just saying there's people out there who kind of make things up. Well, they make things up from observations that anybody can share, right? That's why they have that kind of face validity or plausibility. If you ask those folks that have been part of a great team and ruined for life, what made that a great team? Why was that such a different experience from the terrible teams in your life? They'll tell the same stories. Like in the great teams, we all trusted each other. We were clearly working for some collective goal, and we put that ahead of any personal interests. I could really show up and be my best self. When we had a debate, it was a really robust debate and it didn't get personal. So you describe, and we accomplished something great. So they'll describe all of these things. But the trick is in unpacking what are the actual causes? What are the things that you can influence that create those emergent processes and that keep them going in a positive direction to result in those great outcomes? And unpacking, like, what's a point of leverage? What's a cause versus what's an emergent process? That's the role of social scientists, right? To pull that apart and say, okay, yes, all of these teams that are really superb, outstanding teams that deliver for their stakeholders, yes, they do seem to have these kinds of processes in common, but that doesn't mean the process is your point of intervention. It doesn't mean that going straight at the dynamic or the ways that people are interacting with each other is the most powerful thing you can do to get those great outcomes. It turns out that all that behavior is actually elicited. It's reinforced by the conditions that you create. And so when we started studying teams, we saw all these correlations between behavior and dynamics and how well the team turned out in the end. But we also saw, if you looked at the literature, that I'll tell you one of my favorite article titles ever is "The Conspicuous Absence of Evidence That Process Consultation Improves Team Performance." Right? So once you know the title, you don't have to read the article. It's a meta-analysis that shows that, yep, all these positive correlations. But then when you go in and try to work with the trust or the conflict or all of those dynamics that for better or for worse influence the outcomes, it doesn't actually improve performance. And sometimes that's because teams get so into and distracted by the relational work that you're doing, they kind of forget about the task. But sometimes it's just because the things that are militating against trust or eliciting conflict that becomes personalized, they're still in the system. They're still in the context in which the team's operating. And so all that hard work you do around changing the processes is just going to revert, because what is getting reinforced by the design of the team, the setup of the team, the way that it is designed and led, and the features of its performance context, they're swimming upstream against a really small current, and it's pulling them right back into the patterns of before.
And so if people aren't deliberately creating high-performing teams, what proportion of teams accidentally end up being high-performing teams? Because I know one of the stats on your website is 50% of leadership teams are underperforming. Do we get sort of 5 or 10% accidentally end up being amazing and 50% are a bit rubbish and the others are just, yeah?
Well, accidentally is probably a good way of putting it. Although I've certainly encountered plenty of leaders have really good intuitions about the conditions that team needs. And so in circumstances where those leaders with great intuitions also have the authority to control those aspects of how the team is set up, you can get a pretty good recipe for reliably effective teams. But a lot of times the accident is actually in the context itself. So if you're operating, for example, in a place where teams are dealing with crisis and there's a really critical problem to solve, There's nothing a leader has to do around clarifying purpose or creating a real challenge that engages the team. The context in which they operate has already done that. So there are certain features that teams really need to be effective that are kind of built in, and they're not swimming upstream against such a strong current, right? The work that they're there to do is clear with a clear outcome, and it absolutely requires multiple people to do it, right? And that is, that's the set of circumstances that elicit and reinforce that kind of collaboration.
We've got a client that NHS professionals that manage 75,000 part-time workers in the NHS, and certainly COVID was one of those where it created an amazing, they had, 10 jabs, one life, as a slogan as they mobilized to deliver the vaccine program in the UK. And then after that, the clarity of purpose had disappeared. And so that the piece of work was, okay, let's work out how to put some clarity of purpose back into the organization.
Yeah. I had a very similar experience. One of the things I do when I work with chief executives and leadership teams is I ask them in a series of interviews to tell me a story about when the team was at its best. What did it look like? How were people behaving? Why would you characterize that as a really effective team? And almost every team has a story anchored in COVID, because for the first time, the clarity of what they needed to do and their collective commitment to that above anything that might be calling them as individuals, that was their first time actually experiencing that. And, on the one hand, it's sad that that's the only kind of story, because it's possible to create that kind of clarity intentionally and not wait for, a pandemic to actually do that for you. On the other hand, it actually makes me pretty optimistic, because when you listen to them describe how they operated in those moments of being a great team, they have the same aspirations, right? They mean the same thing by a great team, right? We really took care of our stakeholders. We were proud of what we accomplished. We really pulled together. We used our disagreements and our differences in perspective. We used that in the service of getting that done. And for me, the optimistic point is there are a lot more teams out there that have that capacity and they're not using it. And so, once you see that that's true, it becomes just a matter of finding out what are the sort of steps and leverage points that you can engage them around to help them have many more of those kinds of experiences.
So maybe we should jump in, because I'm listening to you tell that story now, and I know what your model is, and I can hear you hitting on some of the points in your model. So, you've built a model which I think talks to the difference, 80% of the difference between a high performing team and a low performing team, which is a bold claim.
That's a pretty whopping effect size for social sciences to say you can account for 80% of the variance in anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's, particularly in, you're saying follow this model, and that it's almost all explained here. So, you'll have to talk us through it.
Well, there's a difference. There's a difference between having a clear recipe and actually being able to enact that in practice. We can go there in a minute, but 80% of the variance, but we're not talking about a silver bullet. There's not one variable, one thing. If you get this right, everything else follows. It's the framework is called the 6 conditions for team effectiveness. And we divided them in our research and how we talk about the 6 conditions into 3, which are essentials. These are 3 features of teams, fundamental building blocks that leaders can design about the team, and they have to be in good shape. They have to be well designed in order for a team to accomplish anything great. And in fact, if you can't get the essentials in good shape, you're better off trying to figure out how to get the work done without actually creating a team. So there's these 3 things that are really necessary. When I describe what the 3 essentials are, you'll see it's not rocket science. I mean, there are some conceptual complexities to it, but I think, most people find that they're pretty intuitive. It's just amazing how many of these essentials just are really not in good shape for most of the teams that we study. I can talk through the essentials, and then the enablers. The 3 enablers are features of a team and its context that accelerate the development of a fundamentally well-designed team into a really great one over time. And I'll describe the enablers as well. Just helpful to have a team in mind that either went completely off the rails or was really great as I describe them, and just test them against your own experience and intuition. So the essentials are these. First and foremost, if you want to have a great team, you have to create a real team. You have to create something that is not a team in name only. So, when we talk about chief executives or any other leader having 15 direct reports, the answer to the question, who is your team, is not how many people report to you. The answer is, what is the work that is genuinely interdependent, that really requires people to work together closely in interaction and exchange information in order to get that work done well. So you convene a team that is bounded, meaning everybody knows who's in the team and who isn't. It's stable. We stay together long enough to actually accomplish something significant together. And we actually are interdependent. We need each other in order to accomplish some shared accountability. So bounded, stable, interdependent, that's for us in our research, what makes for a real team. Now run that up against many of the teams that you work with and observe in organizations. And what do you think you would learn if you asked people, okay, so who's a member of this leadership team, right? And how long have you guys been together? If you were to say what it is you're collectively accountable for, do you need to really work closely together with all these people to accomplish that? And certainly in leadership teams, the vast majority of them, our own data showed that of the 127 teams that we studied in that original sample, only 11 of them actually agreed on the size of the team. So that is a pretty clear indicator. How can we learn to be an effective team if we don't know who we are, right? It's not entirely clear who it is that I'm sharing this accountability with. Yeah.
And I think how many of the clients that I work with, when we start talking, have a team goal. If you ask people what the team is accountable, they can tell you what they think they're accountable for, but it's very often that, most of the time people will not what I do is my analogy is it's like 7-year-olds playing football, right? Little Johnny comes off and he says, "Mum, look at me. I scored 2 goals. I'm amazing." And the team lost 5-2. And he's impervious to the fact that the team lost 5-2. And so, I have CEOs who say to me, "I can't, we're losing money. The bus is about to crash off a cliff and somebody's asking me for a pay rise." Like, what planet are they on? Just total lack of connectedness.
Yes. With that actually brings me to the second of the essentials, which is that clarity of team purpose. What is it that this team exists to accomplish that no one else can do to contribute to the achievement of the mission of the enterprise? And a lot of times the assumption is if you know the mission of the enterprise, then you know the purpose of the team. And those are not at all the same thing. The real question is, what are the features of work? What are the leadership work in the case of leadership team? What is the work that needs to be done that would genuinely benefit from multiple perspectives, from, aligned engagement among your leaders that no one else can do, and that really has to be done together? And very often that aspect of the enterprise responsibility and the collective work is very fuzzy, very foggy, very abstract and unclear. Whereas for each of those individuals around the table, what they're held accountable for, what they're going to be measured on, what they have been praised for or accomplished throughout their lives and career is absolutely clear. It's very focused on their individual responsibilities. So any sane, rational person in those circumstances would put their time and energy into where they know they can make a difference. And in the absence of any kind of clarity about the team's purpose, you're not going to see really effective collaboration or a great team.
And with your model, I think that's the first time that had occurred to me, that there was a real difference between the company purpose and the team purpose. When we're setting purpose at the leadership team level, probably overlaps. But when I think about other teams in the organization, I can see, thinking about teams that I've led or teams I've been in other organizations, you can come together as a team and say, this is our purpose and this is the time frame, and give yourselves real clarity, which might have nothing to do with it might be like I was talking to a CRO the other day, and he said he had 6 people in his team, and his team were 500% of goals. So they had clarity about, we're going to learn, we're going to excel, we're going to be the number one team in this company. And he said, look, all of those guys have now gone on to be CROs in other organization, large tech firms. And it was about, we're going to be the best team this company has ever seen. And then we're going to support each other, on our career journey, because ultimately this team will dissolve. And that, it meets the company purpose, because the company purpose is, trying to win and succeed in the marketplace. But there was a real clarity around, how he described building that team and how that team came together.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that fuzziness about the distinction between the mission and the specific, the turn of phrase I use, the unique added value of that team to the achievement of the mission of the enterprise, right? That's the job of clarifying purpose. It's what is it you guys can do together that only you can do, right? That allows the mission to be achieved. And, that can be a pretty challenging conceptual task. And I think what a lot of leaders don't yet recognize or need to recognize is that purpose shifts over time. It shifts depending on the challenges the enterprise is facing that this team actually could be able to address. And so that sort of revisiting about what's the connection between the work we do and where we're trying to head as an enterprise is something that needs to be, I won't say continually revisited, so it's not often changing on a weekly basis, although I could tell you some COVID stories where that was true. But even for a leadership team, year over year or, 6 months time, depending, you work with scale up organizations and rapidly growing ones. The nature of the leadership job and what collectively needs to be done changes from, we got to design and establish the principles for the structures and systems that are going to make this a sustainable enterprise. Well, we did those. Now what's next? Right. So, what you have to do as a team changes in some ways predictably over the course of an enterprise's growth, but in some ways not at all. It's redoing the conceptual work of like, what's the big challenge here that only we can address, right? And that's where you want to put your energy into building a great team. One of the problems that I see is a lot of times we pull people together and we ask them to do things that are relatively trivial or that are sideways to the main job or that, never get actually used. And, that sort of thing is a recipe for undermining people's investment in teams and their ability to bring their best selves.
So we've got purpose, we've got real team. What's the third?
The third of the 3 essentials is the right people. And you'll notice that people actually is the third of the essentials. And that's for a reason, right? So getting the purpose, like what is the work that will need multiple people to do it? And then asking the question, and who can contribute to that, right? So it's putting the purpose first and then asking, so what are the capabilities that we're going to need to pull that off? Who are the people that could bring those capabilities, including the teamwork skills, right? The demonstrable ability to work effectively with peers and to collaborate, which is something that's often overlooked, right? We think about the task skills, not so much the collaborative ones, but also ensuring that you have a team that is like small enough to get all of those voices around the table. There's plenty of research that shows once you have more than 6 people around the table, you have a core that are engaged in the conversation and much more peripheral members. So we're talking about keeping it small, and also making sure that you have the diversity and range of experience and perspective that allows you to actually get the benefit of having a team, right? If we all think the same way, there's probably no point in listening to the debate. It's going to surface the same kind of information. So real team, compelling purpose, then the people.
And I think the collaborative thing is really interesting, particularly at leadership team level, because people get promoted because of their task skills. And they then end up on an executive team and they have never needed to collaborate until now. And they might be crap at it. And people don't interview. They're not interviewing for collaboration. So we're going to add somebody to the executive team. I was talking to somebody who was talking to Daniel Priestley the other week who, they had worked really on how do we interview for collaboration. So they ended up with a short list of candidates and they got them to do a project with other members of the C-suite. And he said, actually, Dom, the candidate who I would have hired wasn't the guy we hired, because when we did that collaboration exercise, they weren't the best candidate. They weren't the best team player.
That's a beautiful story. I hope you are telling it far and wide, because I think there's a certain degree of skepticism that you can see collaborative capacities or the ability to work in teams that's so difficult to suss out. It's not at all. You can actually, follow a person's track record across teams and see whether on balance they were a contributor to the effectiveness of that team. And most of the time, you're quite right. It's my experience as well that executives have gotten where they are by being right a lot of the time and assuming that their role is to bring people around to their point of view. Well, if there are 6 people in the room all trying to achieve that, what you've got is a negotiation among positions, not a robust conversation about a challenge out there where we're trying to bring the best of our thinking to it.
Well, I was doing, I guess, a reference call on a candidate for a client, senior candidate for a client today. And this person's former boss was saying, he's not a team player. He just gave me a list of things that he said, you might not see this at interview, but that's really why they didn't work out for me, because they just kept saying, well, I've done my job. Why do I need to come to team meetings? Why do I need to come to the strategic offsite? Didn't want to be on the team, got no value from being on the team. So fascinating.
We did in our research, we identified a very small group of individuals that we came to call derailers. These are people who are destructive of the dynamics of any team of which they are a part. And they're not necessarily the argumentative ones. They certainly tend to be quite individualistic in how they think about what excellence means, but they're often very charming. What they have in common is they actively undermine the other people. It might be in a very humorous way, but they're actively undermining of the other members of the team. And they are frequently the people who are lacking in integrity. Like, they will not dissent and argue a point to agreement in the room. What they'll do is sort of public compliance with the way the team wants to go, and then outside the room do their own thing, right? So violate all of those agreements. But I also find myself wanting to caution about using the derailer label, because, what you described about an individual who doesn't act like a team player, I would immediately want to ask, and when that individual was in a team, was there clarity about what the collective job was and what everybody should be doing together, or was all the clarity in that individual's job and goals? I would also want to ask, and were there any norms of conduct? Were there explicit agreements in the team about what's okay and what's not okay, and what comes to the team table, and what's okay to handle individually? In the absence of clarity of purpose or of norms of conduct, to me, there's no such thing as bad behavior. There's just different expectations of what we ought to be doing that have never actually been clarified and agreed on. So, I think it's important to recognize that there are people who don't belong in teams. They may be great individual contributors. And I certainly have had many, many encounters with chief executives who look back and say, I waited way too long to take that individual off the team because I was afraid I'd lose them from the enterprise entirely. And I hamstrung my team and prevented them from developing into a great one. So, and anecdotally, I will say I've never had a chief executive say to me, I moved too fast to take that person off the team. It is always the other the other way around. At the same time, it's too easy to attribute the destructiveness or whatever dysfunction you're seeing to an individual. That's just scapegoating, right? And if you take that person out of the team and there's still no clarity of purpose and there's still no agreement about norms and there's still no sense that we are a team with a collective accountability and the resources to get it done, in the absence of that, taking one individual out just means that someone else is going to rise to take their place as the symptom, right, of dysfunction in the team.
I had Andy McPhee on, who wrote a book called The Geek Way recently, and he's got a phrase in his book called The Liars Club, where the executive team collaborate with each other to perpetuate mediocrity. They say they're not. And I've seen teams where they have got somebody who's driving dysfunction in the team and they say they want to get rid of that person. But you know what? They don't really, because they know if that person disappears, the level of accountability would go up and they would be under the spotlight. And so there's this sort of, what we say we want, and then we're actually quite comfortable being a bit rubbish because it keeps expectation low and we're meeting that expectation. And God, if we actually got our shit together, we might find ourselves not being able to deliver.
Yeah. I see a similar dynamic in the kind of push-pull in teams between the leader and the team, who's really accountable here. And, behind the scenes, you'll get the team complaining, well, our team leader will not give us any room to make a difference here. And when you talk to the team leader is saying, I'm giving them the room to figure out this strategy with me. And I feel like I am pushing a boulder uphill all by myself. Then when you watch them together, you can see the dynamic of the leader being excessively directive and the team therefore sort of sitting back and being passive and saying, well, clearly this is his show and, it's not ours. And they perpetuate that kind of cycle rather than break it.
So brilliant. So that's the three things we have to have.
Yeah.
The essentials. So then what's the supportive context that we need to have in place?
You got Yep. Mm-hmm. So the enablers. So now we've got a real team with a compelling purpose and the right people around the table. Right. I mean, that in and of itself, good, strong platform, sturdy starting place for a team. Now it needs a few things to help it really develop. And the first thing is what we call a sound structure. It is the case that even a well-designed team needs a few elements of structure to really help them take advantage of their fundamentally great setup and having the right people there. And a place to go together. So the features of structure that we've found in our research are, first, the work that is in front of the team. What is actually the work they're being asked to do when they work together? Is it work that makes sense to be done by a team? Is it genuinely interactive? Is it eliciting the judgment, smarts, and experience of the team members to really do something that progresses their purpose? By contrast, I'd ask you to think about some of the leadership teams that you work with. How do they spend their time when they're convening? Are they just providing updates about what all the individuals have done since the last time the team convened? Or are they genuinely digging into an important problem, challenge, progressing work that really is actually contributing to the ultimate success of the team against their purpose? I'd be curious about your perspective when I've been looking at the data about how at least leadership teams spend their time. Many of them spend close to half their interactive time doing nothing but mere information sharing. It's just sitting back, listening to presentations, most of which are irrelevant to the leadership challenges that any individual is dealing with. It's just a way of, usually catching the chief executive up. And showing how productive they've been since the last time.
I think it's even worse than that a lot of the time. I think that presentation, what people do is they present how busy they've been as an excuse for not having delivered the thing they said they would do, whether there's clarity about that or not. And then, I've got 20 minutes. So I'm going to present for 19 minutes and then I'm going to say any questions, and they all collaborate and don't ask any questions so that it's this sort of informal pact that they won't make life hard for each other. And it's always in the past. So I was talking to a client who's now been a client for a couple of years, and what they used to say is they used to get together every quarter and present failure. And now what they do is they get together every day and they plan for success. And so they've changed the cadence, and it's now all forward looking, and this is what we're going to achieve, and this is where we're stuck and why and how we need help, as opposed to just backward looking and saying, let me give you an excuse about, tell you how busy I've been and why we can't do anything. And so that's these two things are hugely opposite of each other.
They are. And I see a similar pattern. And, for me, when we did the initial study and found that less than 25% of leadership teams out there, fewer than that, are actually effective teams, I didn't take that as an indictment of the leadership talent out there. To me, the most important thing about that 25% finding is that the vast majority of leaders out there have never seen a great leadership team. So they don't know what the habits and routines and the work and the cadence, and they don't know what that looks like. And so they're just enacting the patterns that they were part of before. And everybody comes in and does their presentation because it's the most efficient way for the chief executive to find out what's going on. They're not sitting back and saying, like, what's coming at us? What is coming at this enterprise? What's coming around the corner that we need to be prepared for? That's the forward looking that you're thinking about. That's not the way the work is structured when they get together. So there isn't a dialogue about what's coming around the corner and how we're going to deal with it and what's the opportunity there. And those are the great questions for which a really talented team is so well suited. That's the kind of hard question that you want the benefit of multiple perspectives, but that's not the routine they're in when they convene as a team. And so, it takes somebody intentionally breaking that routine and creating, I was talking about sound structure. Part of it is the work that is put on the table in front of the team. And part of it is the norms of conduct, the explicit agreements. We are not going to do that because that gets us into territory where we're not effective. And we always are going to do that in the way that we work together because we've learned from experience that's going to help us address the challenges that's in front of us. And very few teams have those explicit conversations, and they don't really feel needed until there's a shift in the work and you recognize, we have to work together on something different and in a whole new way. And so we'd better codify what's it going to take to pull that off.
I always try to pull together some sort of team charter because there's often an underlying frustration, because they've never had that explicit conversation about what behaviors are acceptable and not acceptable. And people are different. Some people will always do the pre-read. Some people will never do the pre-read. Even if you promise them and you threaten them with death, they still won't do the pre-read, right? So there's, so what are we going to do? Like, do we, and agreeing what to do, or you said about the derailer, the person who will never commit to the conversation in the room, they'll always have it outside or happily undermine anybody on the team to anybody who will listen at any moment, agreeing that that's not allowed and that there are consequences for that and what those consequences might be. Most teams I've worked with never had that level of conversation, but they get into it and you can then, 6 months later, they've been able to resolve all of these challenges because people either have sorted their behavior out or they've left.
And, you talked about people resisting that conversation or most teams not having had it. I think they're willing to have it and see it as useful only if they're recognizing that the work in front of them is really important. It requires that they work together effectively, and therefore they ought to look at what's been getting in the way. So I don't try to have that norms conversation or create a charter until I've helped the team get explicit about something they're going to do together and work closely together on, and they're going to have to pull it off in the next few months. And in that context, you can then ask the question, okay, you guys have faced this kind of thing before, whether it's with this team or another. What do you predict are the most significant obstacles, including in your own routines, that are going to get in the way of pulling off what you just committed to do? So what have you learned from experience is going to get in the way, is going to rise up? And what have you also learned from experience when those things happen actually get you out of trouble? What are the things that you've learned prevent that from really derailing the team. Then the payoff in that conversation is, okay, so what are we committing to? What are we going to do differently? What are we not going to do anymore? What are we going to start instituting? Because we've done the analysis here. We know from our collective experience that if we're serious about pulling off what we just named, we're going to have to be operating differently. And if that's the way you have it, there's a structure for it called the before action review, which is, it's a lovely way of getting a team to harvest their learning, but it's in the service of getting a piece of work done that actually really matters to their leadership role. And you don't get pablum when you have the conversation that way, right? You don't hear the team saying, well, everybody should shut off their cell phones and participate equally. The sort of, we'd say in the US, sort of motherhood and apple pie, nice things
stakes
to have agreements, but rather what I call norms with teeth. Like, one of the things that gets in our way is everybody makes unilateral decisions about whether they're going to miss that meeting because they've got something more important going on. Well, that very quickly makes it impossible for us to progress. We can't make those unilateral decisions anymore. We're going to commit that nothing comes ahead of this for the next 3 months, right? So now you've got norms that are directly related to what we are, on the hook for. And under those circumstances, people get clear and they are, more than willing to say, okay, that's the shift that we're going to make.
We've only done one of the three.
That's right. That's only the first of the enablers. That so putting some really some thought and intentionality into the design of the work that the team does, and also supportive norms of conduct. Then the second of the enablers is that organizational context. So we call it a supportive context, meaning that the structures and systems in the organization actually promote and make teamwork easier rather than putting obstacles in the way. So every team operates in some larger context, typically a single organization, though, I imagine you too work with a lot of teams that can cross organizational boundaries. But that larger context has structures and systems, for example, the reward system. So how is performance measured? How are people rewarded? And does that system only recognize individual achievement, or even worse, put them in competition with each other, right? Which creates obstacles to collaboration. And yet we still expect people to be good, as it were, and to collaborate anyway. By contrast, there are plenty of organizations that have reward systems that are designed to recognize and reinforce superb team achievements, collective achievements, and to really attach rewards to that. Now, I want to just underscore that in the research that we've seen, rewards by themselves don't create great collaboration. So simply attaching a collective reward does not elicit that behavior. But the opposite sure is true, right? A reward system that elicits competition, for example, or individualistic behavior can absolutely erode, undermine, and prevent collaborative behavior, right? So getting that kind of obstacle out of the way turns out to be part of how leaders and teams create a supportive context. I'll give you one more example of supportive context, and then we could talk about what it takes to actually create one. Many of the teams that I see trying to do the leadership work of understanding the trends and what's coming around the corner and whether we need to change course don't have the data they need to do that kind of analysis, because the information system has been designed to measure very sort of micro things and to spit out a lot of data for the sort of control of the operation. And the information is not synthesized or aggregated in a way that a leadership team could see patterns and trends, or the financial data that our team needs to really judge, are we on a right track? Do we need to course correct? Are we working effectively? We're not allowed to have that data. That's only the very most senior managers that are allowed to have that. So is the context, the structures and systems, providing what the team needs, the material resources, the information, the rewards, any kind of training or technical consultation that a team might need if they're tackling new challenges? Are all those systems on balance sort of greasing the skids, making collaboration easier, or are they putting up all kinds of roadblocks? And, in a lot of places, one of the great ironies I found in studying leadership teams is probably more than any other type of team we've studied, they indicate they do not operate in a supportive organizational context. So the rewards, the information, the training and technical consultation material resources are not really there at hand. And the irony of that, of course, is that they have more power to change the structures and systems than any other team in the enterprise. But they don't think about how to create that supportive context.
It is staggering and amazing how many leadership teams would say that they think their data is terrible. They've got finance data which is backward facing. They don't have forward looking indicators, or they've got a dashboard with 200 numbers on it, and the ones that are really important aren't on the dashboard. And so there's just a lack of focus and a lack of clarity. It's just loads of data but no insight.
That's a great way to describe it. Loads of data and no insight. There was one team that we were working with that was part of our study, who we came to refer to them as the 3-ring binder team, because back in the day, all the data were printed out on paper, and all the C-suite members would come into a team meeting with that fat 3-ring binder under their arm. It was like a badge of honor to know at a really micro level how much pizza was sold in each of the stores in every region around the world. And they never opened it. They never opened the binder, because there's nothing you can do with all of those data points that tell the team anything about the trends and patterns that they need to be sort of analyzing, even if it's backward-looking data, to understand where your problems are. And certainly it wasn't forward-looking, as you say. It wasn't information about.
It's great because, you've got this cultural ritual in their business, which is you can't turn up without your ring binder. Nobody's looked at a ring binder in ages, but it perpetuates nobody wants to ask the question, why do we still do this? And, it's great spotting those things in a business that nobody quite knows why they do it the way they do it.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The meta message here of the 6 conditions framework is, if you do the work to get these 6 conditions in really great shape, a team will get on a positive trajectory. It'll elicit collaborative behavior, and build the team's sense of efficacy, which has a sort of self-reinforcing spiral quality to it. And if you don't do that, what you've done is create conditions that elicit sort of conflict, dysfunction, wheel spinning, inability to land something because the work doesn't make sense, because the resources aren't there, whatever that might be. So you find yourself putting a tremendous amount of energy into course correction, into trying to coach those difficulties as they arise and intervene in the kinds of things that you see as dysfunctional. But if you sit back, do the preparation, the thinking through of, why do I even need a team, and how would I articulate that purpose, and who can actually really contribute to that, and what resources will they need, and what's the work I'd put in front of them. We call that the design work. If you do that well, then all of the real-time coaching, intervention, et cetera, is so much easier. It's minor course corrections. It's taking, a solid team to really dialing up even more how well they use their collective smarts in the challenges that they're facing. So it actually makes the leadership job kind of more engaging and fun if you've done the sort of standing back and getting those conditions in place. But we were just talking about the organizational context and the structures and systems. I think we don't often think about, well, how can I exercise influence upward in the organization? Because I don't have control of the reward system or the information system. But what I can do is engage as allies the people who can shift those things and create better conditions for my team.
And am I right in remembering the data, which is that the uplift in performance, 30% of that could be that sort of design phase, and only 10% is ongoing coaching. So if you don't do the design phase, you are deluded about how much you can impact the future. Whereas if you do sort of stop and do a relaunch of the team, then, you add those two together and you've got sort of half of the potential uplift.
Our heuristic is the 60-30-10 rule. So if the question is, where should I put my energy? 60% of the really critical decisions or actions you can take as a team leader happen before the team even exists. That 60% is in this intelligent preparation, the thinking through, like what really requires a team here? What do I need to focus a team on that would benefit and that really needs that multiple perspectives to do it well? And who can contribute to that? And when I convene them, how will I help them see the connection between this work and the success of the mission, and what resources will they need? That's all the design work. We call it design work. And that's about 60% of the really critical leadership acts. The 30% is breathing life into that great design work the first time the team convenes. So helping that team have a great launch, come to terms with the work and the purpose, to grapple with that, to put their own spin on it, to shape it and invest themselves in it, to understand why we are the right people, what are the capabilities we're bringing, what do we want to count on each other for, to talk through, okay, what's a piece of work that we could do together that will really get this started, and what norms of conduct will support us, right? So breathing life into that in the dialogue and the team beginning to work together. 10%, the last 10, is the real-time hands-on coaching, the intervention in the way the team works together. And, what I often say is, you cannot coach a badly designed team to greatness. You can't do it. So pouring all of that energy into the real-time coaching, not having done the design and launch well, puts you in a position of frustration and wheel spinning and wasted energy, when by far the better thing to do would be to push the pause button and say, this is not working in its current configuration. I'm going to relaunch this team and get it right around the design and launch from the very beginning.
What, other than senior leadership teams, your book on the topic, what other things do you think people should be picking up and reading around this if they're trying to get high performing teams?
I think one of the best books out there, it was published in 2002, and it's still a beautiful piece of work. Richard Hackman's book, it's called Leading Teams, Setting the Stage for Great Performances. And it really is, it's a book written for leaders, not of leadership teams, but of any kind of team in organizations. And I really think in a lot of ways, it's the best book about leadership in general out there. And it really takes off from this point of what we call conditions thinking. It's thinking about the question, how do I create the conditions? What conditions are needed? What healthy conditions will increase the chances that what unfolds here will be effective and will be able to chart a course to really accomplishing great things. That idea of conditions thinking and, putting conditions in place is very different from the more sort of active, hands-on, coach, lead, facilitate in real time way of thinking about what leadership is. It really puts the emphasis on the sort of structure and performance conditions. Underlying this is a kind of structuralist way of thinking, right? Which is that effective behavior comes from healthy conditions, and therefore what we should be doing is creating conditions.
What's your genius?
What's my genius? I think my genius is taking conceptually complex and, 3 and 4 way interactions and distilling it in a way that doesn't destroy the complexity, but it brings into focus what you need in order to make those ideas usable. I think that's it. I think it's the taking complex ideas and making them usable and helping people to see through a different lens and incorporate that into the way they lead and work.
What drives you every day?
Joy, I think, and knowing that it is actually, that every life has plenty of pain and sadness in it, and every job has that as well. And we experience way more than is necessary. And I think the knowledge of how to create healthy contexts that create that, elicit aspiration, that enable people's capacities to develop and be used and and to contribute something that's core to their values. We know a lot about how to do that. And, I sort of want that in everybody's hands, everybody's repertoire.
What unpopular opinion do you hold?
I'm often characterized as somebody who doesn't care about relationships because, I've often said you cannot get great team outcomes by working on the relationships in the team. So I'm often, and that's what a lot of coaches do, right? That's what a lot of team development professionals do. They work on the relationships and try to sort out the conflicts. And, my view is that that's not a fruitful avenue for getting a great team. But it's a misunderstanding to say that means I don't care about relationships. What I would say is relationships have a different place in the causal chain, meaning if you create the conditions for a diverse group of people to accomplish something really significant together that all of them care about, you will build positive relationships. And one of the outcomes of that is great working relationships in which we respect each other, energize each other. So in fact, I do care about our relationships at work and in any other context. I just have, I think, a different and clearer understanding of what it takes to do that.
What's the most recent thing you've learned or skill you've acquired?
I'll try to put it in the context of teams, but it's something about having a strong center, like what's the core? And it's probably in a athletic domain that I've learned that more than anything else, that how everything the limbs do is a function of, the balance and center at the core. And I think that is a pretty good metaphor for teams as well, where the core is the purpose. It's what does this collaboration exist to achieve in the world, change in the world. And, everything we decide and everything we contemplate has to reflect back at that center, at that core.
And lastly, what do you think is the biggest myth in business?
The myth of the heroic leader, the idea that leadership is an individual act and that the characteristics of the person are the most important thing to look at to understand whether leadership is good or adequate. I think real leadership is a team sport, and that to lead effectively, you have to know how to surround yourself with people smarter than you and bring out the best in that collective. And that's the real leadership job. Right? It's not so visible and not so heroic.
Ruth, that's brilliant. Great way to end. Thank you very much indeed for coming on the show today.
Yeah, of course. My pleasure. Glad to have talked with you.